Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to replace the water pump on Toyota and Lexus's 3.5 liter V6, the 2GR-FE. Please note that this procedure will not apply and will not be the same for the updated 2GR, the 2GR-FKS from around 2017 and up models. So if you have plastic valve covers, that's the updated one. That one is a little bit different. This is a job that is described as very difficult, and some places will tell you to drop the engine and all this mess. That's not true. It is not very difficult if you know what you are doing and you have rehearsed this procedure beforehand, which I hope this video will help you with. But you do want to be a little bit on the advanced side with your DIY skills. If you've just done your first oil change, perhaps this is not the job for you. But if you've done more work, spark plugs, you've done some suspension work here and there, this will be the job for you. I will list all the tips because we are working on this 2011 Avalon. I will list all the tips for other models specifically, so in case you're doing this on another model, so you know what to look for. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos if you are a returning subscriber. Well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get to work. The first thing we're going to do here is do some prep work. You're going to want to lift the front of the car. Doesn't matter if it's jack stands, ramps will not work because you want to take the passenger wheel off, but jack stands are okay. I am using the awesome quick jack from Benpack to lift the whole car up on the first step in case you have one of these. You don't want to lift it all the way up because you're going to want to get underneath it and get on top. Second, you're going to take the passenger wheel off. Third, if you have, let's say, an Avalon or a Camry, you're going to have this little cover right here. You're going to want to go ahead and remove that. This will be a little bit in your way. It'll open up a little bit of space so you can see what you are doing. And then last in the preparation, you're going to drain the coolant from the radiator and from the block. You can skip the block part, but then it'll make a little bit of a bigger mess when you do get to the point where you take the water pump. So I'm going to drain the radiator, I'm going to drain the block, and then we'll continue. And one thing I will say while we're doing this video, I'm actually also replacing a radiator on this car and the tensioner, the belt tensioner. You will see it throughout. All of a sudden the part will just look shiny and new, or the radiator will be missing altogether. I will not confuse you with this. I will have the radiator out. It'll actually make filming for you easier so you can see it, you can see everything better. We're going to remove this top mount right here. Few 14mm bolts, few 12mm bolts and nuts. If you have a RAV4, this will be completely different. You will have a mount that sits on the body. You will have to support the engine from the bottom, which we're going to do in a little bit here because we're going to lift this. But you're going to have to support the engine, remove the mount, and remove a plate underneath the mount. Anything else is going to be very similar to this. So let's go ahead and remove the 12s. Two nuts, one bolt. Then we're going to remove the 14s. And then the mount comes off. Then this little plate, and then the other plate. Here's the mount, here's the first plate, and here's the second plate. Then we're going to remove this hose right here. Get yourself some pliers, any kind of pliers that you can reach with. We're going to use these and get this clamp off. Just push it to the back and leave it right here. That way, when we go to install it, it's much easier to slide it back. Then you're going to get a hose tool. This is just a tool that has a tip like this. Be very careful with the hose not to rip it. You're going to put it just to break the contact with the aluminum. Just like so, and you'll feel the hose get loose. Once you get it loose, you're going to twist and pull out. Once you get it out like this, just put it to the side behind the AC line so it's out of your way. One note I will say, in the next scene you're going to see this hose disappear and the whole radiator. I'm replacing a radiator here. I'll remove it to make filming easier, but you don't have to remove it. You're just going to leave the hose sitting on the side like this. We're going to remove this little cover right here. Two 10mm bolts. Now some models will have a clip where you can reach in right here and get it. This one is broken, so we're just going to pull it out. Then we're going to loosen this mount from the bottom, 370mm nuts. We're not going to remove this top one. You're going to leave this mount as it is. Now 2 of these bolts are covered with a cap that looks like this. You're just going to remove this cap and remove the 3 nuts.
Small note before we continue, and I'm adding this after I recorded the video. For the mount, if you have a Sienna Highlander or an RX 350, some of these models will have a second mount just right next to that mount with the 370mm nuts. In those cases, you're going to see 2 more caps similar to the one you removed on the subframe. You're going to remove those and you're going to find 2 more 14mm nuts. And if you miss them, you're going to notice the engine will not want to come up. So just thought I'd throw this one in here so you know.
Now that we got the mount loose, we're going to use a floor jack to lift on the oil pan. As you see in this picture, you're going to use a block of wood or a block of rubber, something of that nature. Now we're going to lift up the engine, and the point we want to look at is right here between the plenum and the cowl. You're going to lift up the engine until the engine is almost touching the cowl. This will vary by model, but at some point you're going to do this by feel. You're going to lift it and see when we get the water pump if we have enough space or not. Make sure the jack you're using is a good one. Don't use a faulty one or one that leaks, because you want to hold the engine in this position until we're done with the job. Now that we have the engine raised up, we're going to go ahead and remove this little lower mount. First thing you want to do is remove this 10mm bolts. Now some models will not have this. The harness will be completely different, but the older ones will have it, the newer ones won't. So let's go ahead and remove it. Now that this is out of our way, we're going to tackle the 14mm bolt. There are across here, there's 2 in the back. 2 tools will work really good for this. A mid-length 14mm socket, all these are 14s, and a long wrench like this one. You notice this job needs a little bit more tools, so let's loosen these and take this mount out. Some of the bolts you'll be able to get them with the mid-length, some of them with the wrench. I'm just using an electric ratchet with a swivel 14. If you need some of these tools, I have them in my Amazon affiliate store. Some of these bolts, you won't be able to get them out. That's fine, just leave them halfway. Now that you've gotten all the bolts loose, you'll never be able to pull them all out. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to move this harness, pull the bracket, kind of walk it out. Pull your bolts as you go. You're going to get to a point where you can pull your bolts a little bit more. This is a little bit of a fight, but this is the key thing to this water pump. There we go. Here's that bracket. Here are the bolts. You're just going to have to work this bracket. This is the bracket that causes some part of the repair manual to tell you pull the engine out. The bolts are too long. You don't have space to pull them out, and there's just not enough room. So this is the biggest fight. Everything else is pretty simple actually from here on out. But this is the biggest fight. When you go to install it, you'll see we're going to install it with the bolts, except these 2, which you can remove with the bracket in place. Let's continue. Now we're going to remove the 2 10mm bolts here and the 1 nut. Very hard to see. This is for the thermostat housing. Let me remove them, and then once I remove it, you'll see where they are. In some cases, the whole stud will come out like this. That's okay, that's not an issue. Well, the new water pump will come with this stud, so that's not an issue at all. Here is another bolt. Now that the bolts are out, we're gonna want to remove this whole housing. You're gonna pop it, and now you're stuck on this O-ring in the back. You're gonna want a screwdriver. Put it right here and kind of help the O-ring pop. Don't use extra force. You're just gonna walk it back. There we go. You have a choice here. You can either, there's a hose right here. You can either take that hose, which I do not recommend, because this hose is notorious to break when you try to loosen it up to take it off. And if you break it, you have to take the intake manifold to replace it because it goes underneath it. So here's a trick that we found. You're gonna take this housing, stand it up, and just put it like that. That way, it's out of the way. It's not really affecting the hose. You're twisting it a little bit, but not much where it breaks down, and that avoids opening that can of worms. Now we're gonna want to take our belt off. This is the idler. Underneath it is the tensioner. You wanna put it in a position where it's not too far this way, so when the tensioner goes after you take the belt, it doesn't hit you back and hit the body, and then you can't get it off. So let's start with this position. You don't need much to take the belt off. Right there, just get it off the alternator and the idler, put it underneath them, then let the tensioner go. See, now we stopped here. If we would have started more like here, it would hit the body and now you can't take it off. Let's remove the belt all the way. Now that you've removed the belt, this is a good time to check all. You can hear the water pump, it has all kinds of play. You can test your idlers, this one is good. This one is actually not good, and we are replacing the tensioner because of that. You can hear it. And this one is nice and quiet. On models with power steering, like this Avalon, you will have another idler in the back. I'm spinning it, I don't hear it, so it's good. If you want to go ahead and replace them, if you're doing this job, that's up to you, but you don't have to. If they're good, they're good. Now, we're gonna remove the idlers. And they're basically 14 millimeter. On the top one is normal thread. One thing I will tell you about these, when you take this idler, there is a washer in the back that is common to fall off, so watch out for it and bring it back and put it in. If you have the washer, you have new style idlers. If you have no washer here, I recommend you replace these idlers because these are the old style idlers that are notorious to make noise and go bad. On the tensioner, and this is where things get interesting. You do have to take the pulley for the tensioner off, but not the tensioner itself. This bolt is reverse thread, so to loosen it, you're gonna actually tighten it. There you go. Now let's take it off. There it is. This is a reverse thread. To remember that when you install it or when you take it out, because I've seen so many people break the bolt. Although it's a little hard because the tensioner will jump up, but people will improvise to break this bolt, not knowing it is reverse thread. The last idler in the back, we can't get to it because the pulley of the water pump is in the way. So let's go ahead and take that off. And I'll try my best to explain how we're going to do this. Here's a little trick to remove these. Use a screwdriver, like this one, a big one. You're going to put it in between the pulley and the bolt, and then you're going to get yourself a long 12 millimeter wrench, and you're going to hold the pulley from turning with the screwdriver and just break your bolts loose. Here's the first one. You're going to move it, grab the second bolt, break it off, get this third bolt, break it off, and the last bolt. There we go. Now all four bolts are loose. You can reach in with your hand, take them out, and at this point, even if they're tight, which these ones are, because this is a rusty Illinois car with some miles, you can reach in with a wrench and hold the pulley with your hand, and it'll be enough to turn it because you broke it loose from the initial torque. You actually hold the wrench on it and turn the pulley and loosen it if you're in a hurry, which I don't hope you are, because this is a job you do not want to rush. Now that we have the pulley loose, I will say one thing. On these, you cannot remove the pulley, and that's the other part of you gotta pull the engine out. You can't really pull the pulley off of this water pump because it hit the body, but some models, you can actually get this pulley out, just kind of maneuver it and get it out. You don't have to get it out. We're gonna work around it. You just gotta work around it to get the bolts. The reason we take it off is if you do not take it off, you can't get to some of the bolts behind it. This makes it a little bit more difficult, but it's doable. It's nothing out of the ordinary. One last thing you gotta do is take this idler in the very back behind it. That also becomes a little bit more difficult when you have the pulley in your way, but at least now you can move it to the side a little bit and get the idler out. So this is very difficult to film. I'll get the idler out and we'll talk about taking the water pump off. Now the next part of the video was extremely difficult to film. I'll try my best to show you, but here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna look at your new water pump. And I want you to see the bolts. This is a pattern of the water pump. Big holes are 12 millimeters, small holes are 10 millimeters. You're gonna wanna take the bottom ones first. This is the one that's gonna be difficult because this is where the pulley will be in your way. You're gonna move it to the side and get this bolt out. Another bolt that will be slightly difficult is this one because for the same reason. And these two bolts are the reason why, and some of the other top ones are the reason why you can't really leave the pulley on. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to look at this, look at your new water pump and get the guide of how many bolts you're gonna need to take. Note one thing, you're gonna have two bolts that remain empty. So these two are the ones for the thermostat housing that we took off, and the rest are you're gonna want to take them off. There's 10 and 12s, take your time, take the bottom ones first. Because here's what happened in this car. I told you at the beginning of the video that you should perhaps drain the block because that little amount of coolant that comes out, it'll help minimize the mess of the water pump. But on this engine, and this is a rust special, if you have that bolt seize, the little brass bolt that you take out to drain the block, if you break it, you're gonna have to buy the whole drain. And that kind of complicates things and pushes you. And these are usually not in stock and not something readily available. So if you see it, that it's tight, doesn't want to come off very easily, which they should come very easily, leave it, you're gonna create the mess. And the mess will happen from here and here. So you're gonna wanna start taking these bolts off. It's gonna start to drip once you take the bolts off. Let it drip. Be patient. Coolant is extremely poisonous and it's really not good for the environment. You do not want that coolant to be all over your floor and then you just wash it off into the sewers. Don't do that, please. Be conscious of the environment, contain it, dispose of it accordingly. Your auto parts store will take the coolant once you collect it, but the stuff that spills on the floor, collect it, put it in a bag, try to dispose of it. Do not just throw it to the garbage or worse, wash it down the drains. Please, this is your responsibility for the environment. This is not, I'm not making this as a cliche, this is actually serious. That ends up in the water stream and that's not good for everybody, including myself and you. So take your time with the bolts. I'll show you the footage of me taking it. You might not see much, but that's how it is because this is really difficult to film in this tiny little space that we're working with here. Here's the first bolt that came out. This was the biggest fight at the bottom. If you need, you can reach it up through the fender well. I couldn't do that because you're in the way. The camera is in the way, and this is making this really difficult because I want to approach this from this side. But take your time. Here are the 12 millimeter bolts. Let's take the rest, and then we'll start draining the coolant. Now the water pump is draining. You can hear it. It's like almost done draining. We're going to take the last few bolts that are holding it that I just loosened at the top to let it drain controllably. In order to remove this water pump, you're going to put the pulley back on. Just kind of put it in the middle. And then you're going to grab the whole water pump with the gasket. We're going to start the journey of getting it off. Pull the gasket out. Here's the gasket for the water pump. And then the water pump itself. Voila! Here's our water pump. Now that you've gotten your water pump to this point, these two holes where you see coolant, you're going to take a towel and put it in those openings where that's the coolant passage. You're leaving these towels there because you want to dry up as much as coolant as possible in there. Just soak it up. So put your towel in there, let it soak up with the coolant, and we're gonna come back in a little bit. Now it's a halfway point, if you would. We're gonna go back, take a break, let it dry up a little bit, and then we come back and install our water pump. Folks, one thing about the water pumps, this is the old water pump. Look at the pulley, it's fully round. This one has these cutouts. This is the new style water pump. This is the one you want when you buy one. When you buy one from the dealership, this is the one you want. If they give you one that is round, don't use it. This is the one that has the problems. This is much better. I haven't seen one of these style leak or make noise yet. Just thought I'd bring this up to you. Now that we've let this dribble for a while, we're gonna take the towels off. Wipe everything off. Good. Try to contain the mess as much as possible. We're going to take a razor blade like this one and we're going to pass it across the surface. The idea this gasket is metal and it could, little pieces of that coating on it will stay on the surface, and the only way you'll get them off is with the razor blade. So let me go ahead and clean that. And we'll put our new water pump on. Should be good. I'm gonna wipe it again just to get any debris off. You're gonna get some coolant dribbling here and there. That shouldn't be an issue. You're welcome to wait for it to completely dry, but a little bit of coolant here and there is not gonna impede the gasket sealing. Just thought I'd mention this for you. Now we're going to install our pump. You're going to put the pulley just like this on it. You're not going to tighten it or put the bolts, but you're not going to leave the pulley like this. You're going to leave it like this. And these new water pumps, they come with these rubber bands just to hold the gasket to it. We're going to take them off. And here's how the water pump is going to go. You're going to go this angle. Move things as you go. Trying not to damage the gasket as much as possible. There it is. Now that it's in position, we're going to start. Doesn't matter which bolt you start with. Just get 2 bolts in just to stand it up and prevent it from falling back. One thing on these bolts, and I already checked this is just a habit. If you see any sealer on the tip of the bolt, take it off, clean it. Sealer here is okay. But at the tip of the bolt, you want to take it off because that could cause it not to tighten all the way. So if you see sealer here, take it off. I have a bolt here that has the sealer. Do you see this piece of sealer? You're just going to rip it off like this. And now we're good. That bolt's good to go. I do this by habit, and I forgot to mention it, so I'm saying it now. One thing you should never do is tighten these bolts when you start them. Start all the bolts first, then tighten them. Because if you tighten one, you might cross thread the rest. That's just how this works. So we're just going to start them. I'm starting with the 12s. There's no particular order you want to start. Whichever works for you. Now that you've started all your bolts, we're going to go ahead and tighten them. At this point, if you have power steering, you're going to install your idler in the bottom. This idler is much easier if you install it from the bottom. I'm doing this for the filming. Every idler you tighten, you always spin it, make sure it's good. Now we're going to install our pulley. And what you want to do is find where the threaded hole is, line it up at the top, and then get your pulley, try to line it up as best as possible. And to know if you are on mark, take a little Allen key, put it in the hole, and then you're going to feel if you have an edge or you're centered. If you're not centered, you can kind of move the pulley until you are centered. Looks like we are centered now. Let's install our first bolt. Second one. Let's install all 4 bolts and now show you how to tighten them. Now to tighten this, we're going to do the same thing we did to loosen it. You're going to put your screwdriver between the bolt and the pulley, and then put your 12mm wrench. You are never going to get a torque wrench here. I am leaving you the torque specs. I'll leave you the one for this one as well, but this is very difficult for a torque wrench. So just snug it down and move to the next one. This is how your screwdriver is going to go, right in between the bolt and the pulley to hold it. Now is the point where we're going to install our tensioner bolt. Now I am replacing the tensioner. I'm going to do that off camera, but I'm going to show you how this is going to go. Remember, this is a reverse thread, so you're going to loosen to tighten. That's going to be the opposite of what we are used to. Now here's what's going to happen when you go to tighten this. You remember, we are loosening. You're going to tighten it to a point where the tensioner starts moving. See that? How the tensioner is moving? I can't tighten it. This is not tight enough. So you're going to get a big pry bar, put it right between the pulley and the ear on the front cover where the timing marks are. Very hard to show you on camera, but you're going to put it there. It's going to hold it steady. While you hold it with one arm, you're going to tighten the bolt. Just like so. Now we're tight. Life is good. I'm going to swap this tensioner real quick and then we'll continue. So there's that tensioner replaced. Now let's install our last idler. Test spin it. It's good. So with your water pump, you're going to get these 2 O-rings. Let's take them out. One of them is going to go right here. You're going to want to make sure that it's seated properly. Once it sits properly, it won't pop out because it has these little ears that hold it in place. Just make sure it's sitting right. Now this O-ring, you're going to want to pop the old one out and install the new one. On that O-ring right here, because the housing is going to go over it, you're going to want to put a little bit of silicone spray. Doesn't matter the brand, just any silicone spray will work. Now we got to put the belt on. I'll show you a small tip. Get a small 14mm wrench, put it on the tensioner. Get yourself a small bolt, 10mm. We're going to lock the tensioner in place using this bolt. Just like that. Now let's put our belt on. We don't have to worry about the tensioner. I'll leave the diagrams for both styles right on the screen. Now the belt is on. We're going to go underneath, pull the tensioner, and pull the bolt. That's it. Now we're going to install a thermostat housing. Sure, it goes in, over the O-ring, over the stud, and we're good. Let's put the 2 bolts and the nuts. Now we're going to tackle the last hard part. Before you install these are the same deal. You see the sealer right here? You're going to want to break it off. There we go. Check the other 2. Those 2 are good. Now you're going to tackle the mount installation. I want you to watch the angle. You're going to leave those 4 bolts on, and you're going to kind of there's no one way to do this. You're just going to have to fight it until it's in. Second bolt. Don't forget the 2 short bolts going as well. We're going to tighten these all the way and then continue. Let's put our 10mm bolt here for the harness. If you have it, some of you will not have this, especially on the newer ones. Only the older ones will have this. Now let's install our hose right here. Radiator hose. Clamp will slide down sometimes. You can just get it. Undo the clamp. Sure. When you put clamps, always make sure it sits in the same spot where it was if you have this style clamps. This is the best style clamp. Some people say the warm clamp is better. This is actually better because this expands and contracts as things heat up and cool down. But you have to install them in the same place, otherwise they might leak. Now that we've gotten to this point, we're ready to install our mounts. So we're going to lower our engine down. Sure your engine's sitting properly. Shake it a little bit in case the stud is sitting over the subframe. Now you're going to install our mount. This goes in first. Then this slides in here. Just sit it, and then this one goes last. There's a bunch of bolts. The bolts are self-explanatory. These 2 are the same. These mounts will be different across the models, but this is one that is very simple. You can't really mix up the bolts. You'll know immediately. There's a specific order to install this. You got to install these first, tighten them, then this one last. So don't forget that part. There we go. The 12s don't matter. You can do them last or first or whatever. At this point, we're almost done. You just got to tighten the 3 17mm nuts for the side mount and you're all set. You do have to bleed the coolant, and in order to make this video not super long, I have a video dedicated to bleeding the coolant on this engine. I will leave that video right here. Also, it is in the description because you have to continue this to the bleeding, otherwise this engine could overheat and you will have problems. Folks, this is a medium difficulty job. Not one for someone who's just starting out wrenching on cars, but if you've been doing spark plugs, you've been doing suspension stuff, again, this is the job for you and you can tackle it. It can get difficult at times, and this is where you have to practice getting your hand in really tight spaces and wrenching, basically. This is typical wrenching. In the end, this is just a collection of nuts and bolts that come out in a specific order and goes back in. There's no diagnosis. There's nothing hard. It's just a process you go through and it's done. Take your time, work clean, organize everything. Don't mix your bolts. Some of them are very easy. They don't have like one part that has 17 different bolts. They're really self-explanatory, but take your time. But the most important thing is you keep the mess to a minimum and clean up. Don't let that coolant just sit on your driveway. Wash it off, collect it, do something with it that is environmentally friendly. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.